going on, Z Nation? Now we're looking at the best places to land in the Apex Legends map. Is it here? Here? Maybe over there? Let's start by taking a look at the map. Now, there are 17 main locations on the map, all with their own distinct advantages, whether it be terrain or the amount of loot that you can find at that location. Let's start by taking a look at the water treatment plant. Now, this area produces tons of mid to high tier loot. Now, all the loot's located across 6 rooms, each with 2 stories. However, most of the loot is located on the back side of the buildings, near the ocean, located in multiple drop boxes. However, the water treatment plant is so far from other locations that it's more of a slower playstyle. So if that's your jam, then the water treatment plant is the best drop location for probably you and your team. But because of the distance from everything else, this gets a B. Now, let's head over to the Hydro Dam and the Repulsor. Now, I grouped these two together not only just because they're right next to each other, but because they're extremely similar in the way they look and the type of loot that they have. Just like the water treatment plant, the Repulsor and the Hydro Dam are both in the high loot category. However, there's just a lot more of it. There's bunkers, there's rooms everywhere, there's a lot more loot in these areas. However, because of that, there will be a lot more teams going to this area. So prepare for a fight if you come to this area. But if your team's good enough, and you do happen to take over the Hydro Dam and the Repulsor, then you'll be sitting pretty for the rest of the match. And because of that, I give the Hydro Dam and the Repulsor a solid A. Now, heading over to the market, this is basically just a gigantic abandoned mall, along with a few shops outside. Now, this is only a mid-tier loot, mid to low tier, so it doesn't give you the same quality as the Hydro Dam or the other ones we've talked about thus far. So I don't really recommend going to this one. It is pretty centrally located though, so if you're trying to get close to a bunch of locations at once and you want to avoid a firefight right off the bat, then maybe you can consider this one. But for the way I personally like to play, this just isn't a place I really want to go. And because it's centrally located, eventually you will be surrounded by all the other teams. And with the quality of loot here, it's just not worth it. I have to give this one an F. Next, let's head southwest to Skulltown. Now, this is basically the same as the market. It only offers low to mid-tier loot. There are, however, a lot more places to get loot. So there are tons of places to go in this area. So this is more of like an upgraded market. So I really don't see a reason to go to the market. If you want to go somewhere that's mid to low tier and not very many people, this is probably the place to go. This is, however, a little further from the center of the map, a little further from some of the other locations that you may want to go. But there are jump balloons, so you can quickly get to those areas, regardless of how far you are. You do need to be careful, though, because there are a lot of nooks and crannies in this area, so there may be an enemy team lurking around. But because of the amount of loot here, even though it's a lower tier, I have to give Skulltown a C. Now, even further southwest of Skulltown is the Thunderdome. Now, this is a high tier area. However, no one really goes out here. So again, if you have a slower playstyle and you really want high tier loot, this is probably the place to start. The biggest drawback to the Thunderdome is that it's literally in the middle of nowhere. You are the furthest point from the center of the map. So if the safe zone decides to start in the far northeast corner of the map, then you've got a pretty far distance to go. This is a pretty good place to stage and set up for the rest of the match. So I have to give the Thunderdome a B+. Now, going north of the Thunderdome, there's the airbase. Now, personally, this is one of my favorite places to land. It has tons of loot boxes along all the airstrips, and it's all mostly high tier. This is one of those high tier locations. It's also towards the center of the map, although it is all the way on the west side. However, for being a high tier location, just like the Thunderdome, there aren't very many teams that decide to land here. I mean, there are more teams than the Thunderdome, but this is in a far better location than the Thunderdome. That being said, there isn't really much more than the loot boxes. There's not a whole bunch of rooms or nooks and crannies where they have more weapons. Therefore, I have to give the airbase an A. Now, heading just north of the airbase, there's a place called the Runoff. Now, this also gives high tier loot, but nobody ever really lands here. This is kind of the place you go after the airbase. However, there are a lot of loot boxes and actually quite a few rooms to plunder. So this is an extremely good place to get gear. And for it being one of the high tier locations, I don't see why people aren't landing here more. So because of those reasons, I have to give the Runoff an A. Now, Traveling just east of the runoff at the airbase, we have the bunker. Now this is centrally located on the entire map. And not only that, it has loot boxes located on the eastern and western side of the bunker. And throughout the bunker, the entire mountain right there is covered in rooms full of loot. Really, the only downside to this location is that it's extremely valuable. Many teams are going to be here trying to get the loot. But if you can secure this location, your team will gear up pretty much faster than any other team on the map. That's why I'm giving the bunker an A+. Now, moving north of the bunker is the Pit and Slum Lakes. I'm going to group these ones together because the Pit is literally just 3 loot totes. Now, Slum Lakes is a mid to low tier. This isn't a high tier location, and it's all the way in the middle of nowhere. It's at the very far northwest corner of the map. I mean, there's really nothing out here. There's no reason to ever be out here. There are a lot of rooms out here, though, that you can get loot and weapons really quickly. So, unless you're just out here just to explore the map, I really don't see the point of being out here. That's why I give Slum Lakes a solid D. And honestly, they're lucky they get that. Next, we're heading northeast from Slum Lakes. Now, this is artillery. This is the northernmost point on the map. Now, this is also a high tier zone, but it's completely isolated. It's a long ways away from pretty much anything. However, there are a lot of teams that try to go here to get gear, so you may encounter a few teams. The good thing about this is that it is very isolated. So if you are the only team that goes there, or you're able to take control of it, you can pretty much set up and get ready and prepare to move out with your team without any distractions from anyone else. Now, there are quite a few rooms along the edges, as well as a couple bunkers in the middle that do offer quite a bit of loot, but it's not really as high as some of the other locations on the map. So because of that, and the distance from everything else on the map, I have to give artillery an A-. Now, next, we'll move just south of artillery to the Cascades. Now, this is basically just a gigantic circle of wooden huts. There are tons of room and tons of loot. However, this is not a high loot area, and it's extremely central to pretty much every high loot area there is. However, a lot of teams like to land here. I see a lot of teams go here. It is extremely central for the whole map, but you have artillery coming down from the north. You have everybody that just cleaned out bunker coming from the west, and you have relay and the wetlands all converging and coming down from the northeast, all of which were high tier loot spots, and this one wasn't. So basically, you get caught in the middle of a crossfire shit show that you're not prepared for. And that's why, even though the location is great and there are tons and tons of rooms to scavenge through, I have to give this place a D+ based on who's surrounding it and the type of loot you can get here. Now, moving northeast, we have relay and wetlands. Now, I'm grouping these two together because they're basically the same zone. But remember, wetlands is not a high tier loot spot, and relay is. If you want to know the best place to land in relay, just check out this video. Right there, there's tons of loot boxes completely covering the edges of this building. Outside of this building, there are tons of buildings, rooms, everything that you need to get a ton of loot. This is honestly one of the best places to go to gather as much loot as possible before heading into battle. And there aren't a lot of teams that come out here, so you can kind of just run the whole show and get your entire team geared up and ready to go. The only downside to this is that you are pretty far from the rest of the map. Luckily, there is a balloon at this location, so you can get out quick. So I would have given this an A+, but because of the location and how far it is from everything else on the map, I have to give it an A. Next, we're going to head southwest down to Bridges. This is basically just like Cascade. There's no high tier loot, and it's clustered right in between bunker to the west and the Hydrodam and Repulsor to the east. I mean, it does have a few rooms, but nowhere near what Cascade has. And with not being a high tier loot area, you have to be completely mad to want to land here. And what makes it more insane is I see a lot of teams go here. Now, I apologize, Bridges, but I have to give you a pretty hard F. No, make that an F-. Now, next we're going to move east to the final location, Swamps. This is the furthest east location on the map. Now, Swamps is not a high-tier loot area like most of the others that we've described, but it does have quite a few loot bins, and there are plenty of rooms for you to raid. And honestly, Swamps is one of those locations that I've rarely seen anyone ever go to. If you're one of those passive players that kind of likes to hide but slowly gear up, this is probably the place to go. If you don't want to go to a high-tier loot area where you possibly can find a team, or where your chances of finding another team are extremely high, this is a pretty good place. I mean, you won't be fighting for loot. There's plenty to go around for all 3 players of your team, because I find that problem with a lot of areas. But even though this isn't a high tier loot spot, I still have to give it a C+. Now, out of all 17 places that we've gone over, I ranked Bunker the highest. I gave it an A+. But is it really the best place to get loot? No, it's not. I would say there's 2 better places to get loot. Number 1, there's places called hot zones. In these hot zones, you'll find really upgraded loot. As you can see from the map, on this one it's Cascades. That's something I gave a D+ to. But because in this match it happened to be the hot zone, it's actually worth going to Cascades. Now, of course there's going to be a lot more people going there, so it's going to be a firefight no matter what. But if you don't mind the conflict, it actually makes some of these low to medium tier places worth going to. Now, if you're feeling really ballsy, the second place you could go that's better than any other place on the map is the dropship. The dropship's going to have a ton of high-end gear. So if you can take over that, you'll definitely be ahead of the rest of the map. The problem is, everyone's going for it. If you don't think you have the skill or your team can't handle it, do not go here. You will die. And that pretty much wraps it up, Z Nation. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and if you want to see something else or have any suggestions or anything that you want to comment on, don't forget to throw the comment down. I read all of them, and I'll see you on the next one. There's a lot of people around you too, Striker.